right, good morning. I am here to introduce Kathy Campbell. She is an Apollo alum, class of 1978, and former CPA who retired last November after 3 years with a large CPA firm and 31 years at Nike. She has a degree from OSU in business administration with an accounting major and computer science minor, long before PCs and smartphones existed. She actually used punch cards and floppy disks when she started out. Most of her years at Nike were in roles that involved financial systems and has been involved in many projects of various sizes in business systems, in a business system analyst, project management, and transition management capacity. She uses Microsoft Office tools daily in her job, along with many financial software system tools, and just recently helped Sunset's College and Career Center redesign their website using SharePoint. Please give a warm welcome to Ms. Campbell.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all awake now. It is not first period anymore. As the teacher here said, I am class of 78 Sunset. So almost 40 years ago, I was playing band concerts up on this stage and probably sitting in the audience here doing other things as well. So I have purple blood like all of you do. I went to Oregon State after I graduated and then went to a company called Coopers and Lybrand. You probably never heard of it because it's merged now with Price Waterhouse, so it's Price Waterhouse Coopers. Unfortunately, the guys that got it wrong at the Oscars with the envelope this year. I got my CPA license while I was there, and then I went to work for Nike. So I'm going to kind of walk you through how I got into computers and how I use computers throughout my entire life period here. So when I went to Sunset, there were no computer classes at all. Didn't exist. I took classes in like advanced math and English. We didn't have an IB program. We had AP classes. So I think I took, I don't even remember, 3 to 5 of those. Took some tests, got a few credits, didn't have to take some stuff in college, so that worked out pretty nice. And so I didn't really know what I was going to do when I went to college. I had an uncle who was an accountant, and he said, "Hey, Kathy, you're kind of good at math. Why don't you become an accountant?" And I'm like, sounds good. It was good opportunities for women, paid well, so that's what I decided to do. So when I went to Oregon State, I majored in business administration with an accounting emphasis. And for some reason that I have no recollection of why, I thought, I'll minor in computer science. It sounded like a good idea at the time. However, it looked nothing like what you guys are even taking now in high school today, because we just had classes in what was called mainframe programming. You know, like you go to the movies and you sometimes see these old-time computers that take up like a whole building, and they have those real things that are tapes, and it was kind of like that. And they taught classes in programming languages that you may have never heard of, like the one up there on the screen called COBOL. I remember learning something called Fortran and something else called BASIC. So I don't know if any of those you can remember over here. None of these kids have probably ever heard of any of them. But I do remember also taking a class in systems analysis, and that was actually one of the most memorable classes. I learned how to do flowcharts and document how a system worked, and I used that throughout my entire professional career, many, many different ways. So if nothing else, take a class in how to do that kind of thing in terms of process mapping and flows and that sort of thing. As in the introduction, a few things that I got to use at Oregon State you've probably never seen. This is actually a slide of dinosaurs, I think. This is what's called a key punch machine. Anybody ever heard of that? Oh, good, a couple of you. You put these things called punch cards in them, and they were blank. You can see a little bit here, there's holes on that thing, and it has numbers from like 0 to 9. And you put a big stack of those in the key punch machine, and you typed your program code, and it punched the holes in the cards. And then you put probably a stack of these cards that was your program together, and you had to run it through something called a compiler, and I hope that's a picture of a compiler. I don't really remember what it looked like. And you put the stack in, and it read all the cards, and it sort of put together your program in memory, and then it would execute your program. And then you'd find out that you typoed on one of the cards, and you had to go figure out which stinking card it was and which typo you made, and do it all over to debug your program several times. And you would go back to the punch card machine and punch another card and figure out it was which card in the order, and it was a real pain in the neck. So you're lucky you don't have to do any of this stuff at all. But it was the precursor to what you're doing today. So 30, 40 years ago, that's what computers look like, and that's where you today have smartphones and tablets. Think about what's 30 or 40 years going to look like from now, because what you have right now is going to look like this stuff, and what you'll be using then will have nothing to do with probably what you've got today. So it's a continuous process learning. When I got to the CPA firm after college, I had to do what are called financial audits. Not the funnest thing on the planet, but it's a necessary evil to actually get a CPA license. And you also take a multi-day test. Usually you take it several times to get certified. And there's a picture of the first PC that I ever used. It was the size of a sewing machine, as was my audit bag. So I walked around in my little suit with skirt and heels and carrying 2 gigantic bags that weighed a ton. And you put these things called floppy disks in them. So those are about 8 inches, they're floppy, you could actually do this. And you'd put them in the computer, and I don't remember how much memory they had on them, but it was pretty much nothing compared to what your phone actually holds today. So that was my introduction to an actual PC initially. And you can see how tiny the screen was, and it had no graphics at all on it. So after I got my license, I decided, well, I've had enough of this auditing stuff. I'm going to go somewhere more fun. And so I went to Nike. I actually applied to Nike to an ad in the newspaper, which is unheard of these days. And I did not get the job I applied for. But I got another job that wasn't posted. And a couple years later, I got promoted over the person that got the job that I didn't actually get. So take heart when you get a rejection on a job application. Sometimes it works out in the end. So I thought I'd explain a little bit about what finance is, since I'm assuming not everybody knows that, and then I'll get into a little bit about what I did there and how I use computers. So finance basically has a couple of components to it at Nike. There's groups that look at the past, what has just happened, how much money did we make, that's called the controlling teams. And there's groups that look at the future and try to predict what are we going to do, so they do budgets and forecasts. And I can tell you right now, they're always wrong. We've never seen a forecast that was actually right yet, but if you get close, it's good enough. So these teams have a little bit different audiences. So the folks who are reporting on actuals are not only reporting to the internal Nike business teams and the president, et cetera, and the board of directors, but they're responsible for also doing financial statements that have to adhere to a lot of rules that are sent to the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC. That is the group that you have to adhere to when you are a publicly traded company on the stock exchange like Nike is. So we have an entire team that does nothing but prepare the reports that go to the SEC. That's their whole job. The folks that are working on forecasts and budgets are internally focused only. That we never share our forecast with Wall Street, because usually they assume wrong stuff and do weird things with it and make our stock go down. So that is all very closely held information. Okay? And at Nike, we have a large finance organization. I couldn't even tell you how many people are in it now. It's thousands. They report on over 200 companies or legal entities in over 90 countries. We group them into 6 geographies, and we close the books on these every single month. So the first week of the month or so, we are busy closing the books and trying to add up the numbers from thousands and thousands of places when you think about it. So pretty big job. To do that without computers would be very difficult. Okay. So we have to use financial software to do that. When I first came to Nike, my first job was in the international division. I was a business systems analyst. That's the job I got that wasn't posted. And we had 5 companies that we owned internationally at Nike, as well as the US. So now, of course, we are up to 90 countries. We've massively expanded. And we used, in our team at the time, we had 2 PCs. The rest of our terminals were what we call dumb terminals. They were hooked straight to the mainframe. We didn't have any software that could take data from one computer and put it in another computer. We had to actually print it out and batch it up and type it into the other computer. So I was so excited when one of my projects was to use some software that actually extracted data out of the PC to automatically load it into the other computer. It was like, wow, that is so amazing. And I remember that was on a big floppy disk. It was a program we bought. So there's lots of other software that you need to use in finance these days. So I kind of grouped it into these different buckets. So there are some systems that are processing very, very detailed financial transactions. So the business decides to go out and buy something, you have to have your accounts payable system create a purchase order and then eventually pay the vendor for whatever it was that you bought. You also have to bill your customers, and then you have to pay collect the money that they pay you. And you can just imagine how many thousands and millions of customers and vendors Nike must have. So you have very, very big transaction processing systems in finance. You also have something called a general ledger that is taking that data and adding in any other transactions that we may be having to record. So those are all known as transactional systems. When we close the books every month, you have to actually aggregate that data because the level of detail is just unbelievably voluminous in order to come up with what are known as a balance sheet and an income statement. Everybody heard of balance sheets and income statements? No? Okay. So balance sheet tells you what you own and what you owe. And an income statement tells you whether you made any money or not. It's that simple, okay? Sounds simple, but it's not that simple when you have millions of transactions. So you have systems that are called consolidation systems that pull all that together. When you own companies like Nike does, you can't just add them all up and say, well, that's our numbers. You have to recognize that sometimes those companies are selling to each other. So for example, if the Nike USA had to send some product to Nike Japan because they needed it and they didn't have it, that's what's called an internal transaction or intercompany transaction. And you can't just add Japan and the US together and say those are our results for the SEC. You have to actually take out that transaction that was between really Nike's left hand and right hand. And then you have the correct numbers. So those are known as eliminations if you ever take a financial consolidation class. So there are systems that go through and look for those transactions and calculate all those things and help you present the numbers correctly. And then we also have a number of systems that actually help the business understand, well, what is going on? What are the different teams in go-to-market and sales or in other areas of Nike? What are they planning? And how do we forecast the financial impact of those things and help you decide, should we actually invest in that stuff? So for example, Nike recently had to decide to stop selling golf equipment, the clubs and bags, et cetera, because it wasn't making any money. So you're trying to decide where to invest your resources, and sometimes you pull it out of some things to put it in other things. Nike's making lots of investment in the digital world right now. We have huge teams doing that. We have all that online stuff that you can do for buying Nike product and customizing Nike shoes with colors that you want, all that kind of stuff. So that last bucket is where we're trying to help the business figure out where should we actually be funding projects, because we always have a long list of projects, more than the amount of money that we have. Okay. So how does finance work with technology? So my entire career of Nike, I was never in the IT team. I sometimes was in the finance accounting team, but I really spent my business focus on the middle of that I call the translation. So I could speak accounting and I could kind of speak system stuff, and so I would help those teams understand what the heck each other was saying, because most of the time it would kind of go like this and they really didn't know what the other guy was talking about. So at Nike, we have the controlling and planning teams that I mentioned. We also have, underneath them, there are many different organizations. Controlling is organized by what we call business process flows, so what they call, groups they call procure to pay and order to cash and things like that. And then in planning, there are groups that are organized by the geographies, sometimes by our categories like running and basketball, that kind of thing. And then we have what are known as expert functions. So there are people that are experts in tax, and that's a good-sized team. Experts in treasury, they are worrying about cash and investments all the time. They worry about foreign exchange and exchange rates. A lot of really spooky stuff that I don't like to think about. And then there's audit teams as well that do a lot of internal audits around the company, not just in finance. So they all have very different system needs that need to be supported by our IT team. So at Nike, it's this is a simplistic picture, but they are organized in a couple of different groups. So you see solution delivery, and down below that, you'll see finance solution delivery. So we have a team of people that are dedicated to supporting just the financial systems that we use at Nike. A number of those people came up from the finance organization, were not necessarily IT people by training, but they had an aptitude for it, or they might have had a minor in it like I did, and they might have been on a project that brought in some of the financial tools and ended up later going into IT and actually supporting the tool for much of their careers. We also work with a group called Shared Services, so you can see some examples of teams there: security, network support, various other teams that sort of look for the greater good of the Nike world, and so they want to have consistent, for example, in security, they want a consistent design of how Nike handles security. And so that any project that comes along, they get involved in it and they help the business teams figure out how to design security correctly to meet Nike's needs. Okay. So how is technology used in finance? So this is just some examples that I could think of and remember after 30 years. It's been a long time. So there are certain tools that you use every day, and most of the people at Nike use these. So a lot of email with Microsoft Outlook, and then Excel, PowerPoint, and Word, as well as SharePoint, which is a document sharing tool, and we use a lot on projects. Nike has 20,000 plus SharePoint sites in use at this time, so it's heavily used for teams to be sharing documents between people instead of using shared drives and things like that. We also purchase software at times and then have to implement those. Those are very big projects. You can see SAP. Anybody ever heard of SAP out there? A few of you? It's a gigantic German company that does what's called enterprise financial or enterprise solutions, and financial applications are part of that. Nike put SAP in starting in the year, I believe, 2000. We had Canada go on it, and then the US went on it, and then Europe went on it, and then Asia went on it, and Americas went on it, and it was about 6 years later we finally got done, and $400 million later. So that is how we run the business at Nike, and we're able to actually really grow because we could finally bring all of our systems together and they could talk to each other, and so that was a major project. I also put on there some projects before that, Oracle and Hyperion. Hyperion is the software that we brought in the international division when I was working in there, where instead of using spreadsheets, which at the time was Lotus Symphony. Anybody ever heard of that one? I mean, it's like ancient. And we got tired of doing things on spreadsheets, so we actually bought this first version, if you will, of consolidation software made by Hyperion, and I think they've been gobbled up since by Oracle. We later went in and put in Oracle financials so that all of our different locations in the world actually had the same financial package, because we would just buy up a company that had some whatever software they had and just use it, and then we'd have to deal with interfacing that into Nike's systems and trying to get the numbers in. It was quite complicated. So a lot of projects are involving buying software from a vendor and then trying to bring it in and put it in and make it meet Nike's needs. But that doesn't cover everything. So sometimes you have to build custom solutions. So these are just some examples. I don't know if you can see in the back, but something called sales cutoff and accruals, where you're saying, hey, did I record both the income as well as the expense for this sale that we made? Something called order status, where we're trying to match, well, what's the factory say we're making and when are they going to deliver it, and telling the customer when it's going to actually show up. Price lists, that's kind of self-explanatory. What are things going to cost? And then a project that I did actually mostly at home while I had a 4-year-old with a broken leg is global cost allocation. So this is where at Nike here in Beaverton, we have a lot of teams that are working on things that benefit the entire world, and the IRS doesn't let you deduct those for tax purposes if it doesn't benefit the US, so you have to actually compute how much of those costs is benefiting the UK, France, Germany, etc., and you have to actually spread those costs out so that those taxing countries can include it in their numbers. So kind of complicated area. So one of the things I mentioned earlier was this SharePoint. So how many of you think you've ever used SharePoint? Raise your hands. Really? You ever been on the school website? How many of you have been on the school website where you've used SharePoint? Because it's on SharePoint. In fact, I'm going to make a commercial here for the College and Career Center. This is the website that you can get to off of the Sunset site under academics and get to all the resources that the College and Career Center has. And we just revamped this. I'm one of the mentors. I have 11 juniors that I'm working with on doing their post-high school planning. And as a new mentor, I said, geez, this website's impossible to find anything. And I asked if they wanted some help. And when I found out it was on SharePoint, I said, yay, because I actually know how to use that thing. And so we went in and we alphabetized the links on the left because they were in no order whatsoever. And we cleaned up most of the pages. We put their neat little logo with the C and the mortar board on there that they didn't even have anywhere, but they have had a graphic design student do last year, I think. And so we've been cleaning up all these pages, and we've got a little bit more to do, but we're almost done. So if you haven't ever looked at that, go in and see what's in there, because you're going to want to use it at some point, I think. So you can now say you've actually used SharePoint as a consumer of it. Okay. Now, this might be hard to read. This is my only slide with a lot of words. I don't really like PowerPoints with lots of words. In fact, if you guys go through your careers and are doing PowerPoints, the goal is the less words, the better, because nobody really wants to read that stuff. But this is actually kind of my career at Nike. Starting out in international accounting, through a reorganization, I ended up running a financial user systems team. I went into global apparel and actually did more of that planning and forecasting, budgeting area there. And then came back into corporate finance and worked in a couple of different areas there, and ended my career in a reporting team. And so I've listed kind of the job titles I have. We have a lot of crazy job titles at Nike, so you kind of just make up whatever your job title is, but there's usually something official to go with it. And you can see I've done many different things there: business systems analyst, accounting manager, assistant controller, department manager, financial manager, etc. I ended my career with a title called Global Finance Information Director. That means whatever I wanted it to mean. And I did many projects. I listed a few of them here. I can't really remember all of them, honestly. There's so many. And the ones in yellow with the little blue ribbon actually were all award-winning teams. And that is one of my proudest accomplishments at Nike, is working with really good teams, whether we won an award or not. Working and collaborating with good people is one of the hallmarks of working at Nike. We are a very collaboration-driven company. And so whenever we won an award, these are different internal awards that we would have at Nike, it was always really fun and felt really good. So those were all great experiences, a lot of good people working on those. And the point there really is that you never actually do anything on your own. You have to work with a team, and you have to be able to do it in order to be successful. So I've also listed a lot of the software tools that we use, and some of them you probably never heard of, like Mapper. I mean, I never heard of Mapper when I even went to Nike. I had to actually learn a different language when I went there, and I actually did some coding in it. Don't ask me to do it today, I've totally forgotten it. And there are some other software tools up there that don't exist anymore, but you can see a lot of other big ones like Oracle Financials and SAP. I use a lot of Visio to do diagrams. If you have not learned that yet, you might want to pick that one up. That's a great tool for doing flowcharts and process flows. I use a lot of SAP-specific tools that you can see up there. And what else? I mentioned SharePoint a couple times. And in my last project, I think I'm going to highlight here, this was where we brought in the latest iteration of a consolidation system, so the one that adds up all those legal entities across all the companies. So we started that. That was an SAP product that had come out in the last few years, and we were on an older version that was not going to be supported anymore. We've been using it for 15 years, and we finally got funding after a lot of difficult battles to try to get that to happen. And so we had a bunch of consultants who were experts in this come in, and they all said, well, it's going to take 18 months to 2 years to do what you need to do. And our management said, great, you have 10 months. So I honestly would say that project, I've never worked as many hours and as hard as I ever have in my entire career on that, as on that project. But we pulled it off. We couldn't believe it. It actually worked when we went live last May. Our first fiscal year starts on June 1 at Nike. And so my role in that project, because I'd been there a long time, was really many different hats. So I did some project management. I did something called transition management. Does anybody know what transition management is? Okay. So transition management is where you have to think about, what is this project going to change? Who is it going to impact? What do they need to know to get through the change quickly? Because everybody's always afraid of change, a lot. And so you want to figure out ways to make that easier. So I work with people that were training experts and also transition management experts. I knew a lot about Nike and the teams at Nike, and helped them come up with plans on how we could get them educated on this brand new system. We had 500 people around the world that actually had to participate in testing of the system, as well as in converting historical data from our old system into the new system. So we had a year's worth of data to compare, and to get them all up to speed on how to use it so that they could get through the real close when it went live later. So that was a pretty big area. But another area that I worked on here that I did not really necessarily have an expertise on, but I had a little bit, was security. So everybody sees in the headlines all this stuff about hacking and emails being leaked and all this stuff. So of course, a place like Nike, it's pretty important to have security on your financial system in particular. So I knew a lot about the different teams at Nike and how they needed to use this new consolidation system. And then I worked with folks from the shared service team that were from security that know how Nike's SAP security needed to work. And we also worked with consultants who were experts on this specific consolidation tools security design. So between the group of us, we were able to design a very streamlined security system and design so that people could get assigned a role that gave them everything they needed to be able to do. So that to me is kind of an area that if you've never thought about in computer science, you might want to think about. So I have a little quiz coming up. So how many times a day does somebody try to hack into Nike's systems? Okay, take a look at those answers and I'll have you raise your hand. So how many times a day do you think people try to hack into Nike? How many people think it's A, 500? Okay. How many people think it's B, 1,000? How many people think it's C, 5,000? And how many people think it's D, 10,000? $17,000 times a day, somebody is trying to hack into Nike. And this number is a couple years old, so it's probably 20 plus by now. We have a team of 200 people whose job it is to deal with computer information security. They don't all fend off these attacks, but they are dealing with that every day. So you can imagine what kind of a job that is. We have a lot of stuff people want to steal. All those designs of all those products are just, people are after it all the time. They're after our financial information, they're after those forecasts, etc. So that's a pretty big deal. Am I over time? Can't see. So I'm going to leave you with a couple of tips here. Collaboration, I mentioned that word earlier. That is, Nike is all about collaboration. So if you've ever done a class where you have to work with a group and there's always somebody that doesn't want to do their part, guess what? It's going to keep happening your whole life. So you're going to have to figure out how to work with groups and how to collaborate with people. One of my favorite things that I remember about collaboration is working on an Oracle Financials project we had to do some change to. And we thought of 14 options with the input of a number of people. And of course, number 14 was the one that we did. And it turned out to be a seamless change. Most people didn't even know we did it. So the more you collaborate with people and they contribute their ideas, the better solution you end up with, because you on your own are not going to think of the best solution. Other people can think of things from different angles. So you really want to focus on that. Continuous process improvement. This is looking at the business process and not just your own little piece of it, but what's going on before you and what's going on after you. If you have a chance to take any classes in what's called Lean, that's not just about manufacturing, that is about any kind of business process. You can look at it, diagram it, and look where there's waste and where there's time that you can take out of the process and make it better, and computers usually help answer that. Be proactive. Don't wait for your boss to give you work. Go find something to do. Suggest a project. Come up with an idea. They may not take it on the first bite, but it shows that you're interested in trying to make things better. So be proactive. And remember about continual learning. So you have to learn your entire career. I mean, if I had only remembered that mainframe stuff, I mean, I would have been fired a long time ago. So one little point about learning. Only about 10% of what you learned, you actually learn in the classroom, okay? 20% of it, you're learning from things like mentorships or feedback people give you or networking, etc. And 70% of it, you're getting on the job by taking on challenging projects and being interested in things that you've never done before. All those projects that I listed up there that I did, I never did any of those before. Not ever. So you've got to be willing to kind of take the risk and go after something that might be kind of scary and try to do it and see how it goes. And that's usually how you get known across your company. In 31 years at Nike, I only had to apply 2 times for a job. And one was a formality because I was already doing it. So networking and getting to be known by what work you've done is really a great way to advance your career. And in my case, retire at the age of 56. So any questions if we have time?
Probably have time for at least one or two. Anybody?
Let's see out there with the bright lights.
Yeah, maybe.
Has anyone ever successfully hacked into Nike?
I'm sure they have. I don't know the story because we certainly wouldn't want to advertise it. We certainly have had internal situations happen, you know, not just on computers, but you probably read in the paper, we've had people who work for Nike walk out the door stealing products. So you have to be vigilant all the time. It's a constant, continuous onslaught of a company this size in all kinds of locations. When you're in that many countries, it can happen anywhere. So there's a lot of jobs to be had trying to stop that stuff from happening to you. So good question. Any other
Okay.
ones out there? No?
Thank you.
I see one more down here.
Are there any shadowing opportunities for people interested in these kinds of jobs?
Okay.
Shadowing opportunities?
at Nike.
I've not heard of them at the high school level. Nike does have an internship program, so if you are between your junior and senior years in college, usually about January, they start taking applications for that. I can tell you they reserve a lot of them for companies or for colleges that Nike has a sports marketing relationship with, like we outfit their football team or whatever. And as part of that arrangement, they get a couple of internships for students at that school. But that's not necessarily all of them. So it is very hard to get in Nike straight out of college. I can tell you that I didn't. Most of the people I know that have been hired at Nike work somewhere else first and then come in later. A lot of them come in as contractors first and get hired on. I mean, you can imagine the number of people that apply to Nike on a daily basis. It's massive. But if you can get in at one of the retail stores and start learning about the product, even if that's not what you're going to do later, that's not a bad thing to do as a sort of a foot in the door as a high school student. But you can always call the Nike number and see if they can route you to somebody in HR to do a shadowing kind of thing. Or if your parents or your parents' friends know anybody in particular, you can do that. My son is a sophomore here at Sunset, and I've had him do a curly with a couple of graphic designers that I happen to know, even though I'm in finance, because that's something he was interested in. So that was a wonderful experience for him to talk to those guys and find out what it is that they do. So I would encourage you to, if you have any connections, to try to do that. Do you have any question?
All right. Thank you very much.